I had just settled into the comfort of a quiet evening when the phone rang, a sharp intrusion that jolted me from the fragile peace I had built for myself. The number flashing on the screen was one I recognized instantly, my parents' landline, a relic of my childhood that had always carried with it the weight of expectation and control. For a brief moment, my heart betrayed me, fluttering with a strange mix of dread and longing, because despite everything, some part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, they were calling to ask how I was doing, to bridge the canyon they had created years ago when they cut me off. But the hope dissolved the moment I answered. My mother's voice, cool yet tremulous, wasted no time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about your sister," she said. Her words clipped, her tone urgent, as though I had been summoned to a boardroom rather than to a family conversation. Before I could respond, before I could even brace myself, she dropped it like a stone into still water. "She owes $150,000. The collectors are after her, and the only solution we see is for you to sell your house." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. My house. The one I had fought tooth and nail to afford. The one that stood as a monument to every sleepless night I had endured after they had left me to fend for myself. My house wasn't just a roof over my head. It was proof that I had survived without their help. Proof that I had value even when they had deemed me disposable. And now, with one blunt sentence, they were asking me to erase it all. To dismantle the fragile life I had pieced together, not for myself, but for the sister who had always been their golden child, the one who had never known the sting of abandonment, who had always been shielded, protected, indulged. "Sell my house?" I finally whispered, my voice more disbelief than question. My father's voice thundered through the receiver, as if to remind me that his authority still lingered, even after years of silence. "Family comes first," he declared, as though that single phrase absolved them of the years they had left me stranded, as though invoking duty could overwrite the betrayal that had carved itself into my bones. I sat frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, the room around me dissolving into a haze as their words collided with my memories. I remembered the day they cut me off, how swiftly and decisively they had done it, like severing a limb they no longer needed. I had been in college then, struggling under the weight of tuition and bills, believing, foolishly, that family meant unconditional support. When the checks stopped coming, when the calls dwindled to nothing, I had been forced into survival mode. I had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, skipping meals, skipping sleep, clawing for every inch of independence. And through it all, the phone never rang. Not with offers of help, not with words of encouragement. Only silence. And yet now, when my sister's recklessness had led her into debt, now they remembered I existed. Now they saw me as a resource, a safety net, a pawn in their endless game of favoritism. The more they spoke, the more surreal it became. They spoke of sacrifice, of loyalty, of what it meant to be part of a family, throwing those words at me like darts meant to pierce through the armor I had spent years forging. My mother's voice cracked as she said, "You're her brother. She needs you." As if that simple fact should dissolve the history between us. As if my love for my sister should outweigh the years of neglect. As if love was enough to erase the scars they had left behind. I wanted to scream, to shout, to remind them of every night I had gone hungry, every time I had been humiliated for not being good enough, every year I had built alone without their acknowledgement. But the words lodged in my throat, heavy and suffocating. Instead, I sat there, silent, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white, my heart pounding with a cocktail of anger, betrayal, and, God help me, guilt. Because even as fury burned in me, there was still that small, desperate voice that whispered, "What if they're right? What if family really does come first?" It was the cruelest trick they had ever played on me, teaching me to crave their approval, even after they had abandoned me. And so I listened as they pleaded, demanded, and justified, their voices overlapping, a chorus of manipulation that pressed against me until I could barely breathe. When I finally ended the call, the silence of my living room felt deafening. I sat there in the dim light, staring at the walls I had painted myself, the furniture I had chosen, the photographs I had hung, tokens of a life I had painstakingly built from the ruins they had left me. This house was more than wood and brick. It was my sanctuary, my proof of resilience. And yet, for the first time, I looked at it with fear. Because their demand wasn't just about money, wasn't just about my sister's mistakes. It was about control, about dragging me back into the web I had escaped, about reminding me that no matter how far I ran, they still believed they had the right to dictate my life. I felt the weight of the ultimatum settle over me, suffocating and inescapable. To say yes would be to lose everything I had fought for, to erase years of survival and independence. To say no would be to sever the last fragile thread connecting me to the people who had given me life but withheld love. Either way, I was staring at a kind of loss, and as I sat there, the glow of my phone screen illuminating the missed calls already piling up from them, I realized that this was not just a demand. It was a test, a line drawn in the sand. And whichever choice I made would not only define my future, but also determine whether I would finally break free from their hold or fall back into the cage I had spent my whole life escaping. The night after that phone call, I sat in my living room with the lights off, the shadows of my house stretching long and uneven across the floor, and memories came crashing into me like a tide I had tried for years to hold back. It started with the eviction notice. I could still see it as clearly as if it were taped to my front door again, the paper curling at the edges from the damp, the bold black letters announcing not just that I had lost a dorm room, but that I had lost a safety net I never thought my own parents would pull away. I remembered standing there, my hands trembling as I peeled it from the door, the curious stares of neighbors burning into me, shame rising in my throat like bile. That was the first time I realized what abandonment really felt like. Not the cinematic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, devastating kind that leaves you homeless in a world that never stops moving forward. From there, it was a blur of survival, days bleeding into nights as I picked up every shift I could find, first at the campus cafe, then stacking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store, sometimes working both back-to-back until my body ached so badly I couldn't tell if the tears stinging my face were from exhaustion or despair. Meals became luxuries, half-eaten sandwiches saved from the cafe, instant noodles devoured in the cramped room I managed to rent with two strangers who never learned my name. Every dollar I earned was divided into neat little boxes in my mind: tuition, rent, food, bus fare. There was no room for joy, no space for mistakes, and certainly no time for dreams. Friendships I had once valued slipped away, not out of malice, but out of inevitability. When you are constantly hustling just to stay afloat, people stop waiting for you to catch up. Invitations dwindled, then disappeared altogether, and I learned to tell myself that solitude was strength, that needing no one was freedom, even as the loneliness gnawed at me. And through it all, silence. My parents never called to ask if I was okay, never sent a letter, never offered even a word of encouragement. The only reminders of their existence came through secondhand whispers, or the occasional stinging comment when our paths crossed at rare family gatherings. You could have done better. We expected more from you. Why can't you be more like your sister? Each phrase was a dagger, each comparison a wound that refused to heal. My sister, their golden child, the one who always had her hand held and her path cleared, remained untouchable in their eyes, no matter how careless or reckless her choices became. She failed classes. They paid her way. She ran up credit cards. They bailed her out. She cried and they rallied, but me, the one who clawed through mud to stand on my own, I was invisible. And yet now, after years of that neglect, they dared to invoke family duty, to preach about sacrifice and loyalty, to accuse me of selfishness when I hesitated to throw away everything I had built. Where was their loyalty when I needed help scraping together tuition to stay in school? Where was their sacrifice when I skipped meals so I could afford books? Where was their sense of duty when I stood alone at graduation? No family in the audience to cheer as I received the diploma I had bled for. The hypocrisy was staggering, and yet, as I sat there staring at the walls I had painted with my own hands, I felt the old guilt creeping back in. That familiar, suffocating grip that told me maybe they were right. Maybe I owed them something just because blood ties said so. I hated that voice. Hated that after years of carving my own way, I still heard it whispering in the back of my mind. Still felt the weight of their disapproval crushing me. It was as if I carried two versions of myself. The one who knew I had survived and earned everything I owned, and the one who still longed for their acknowledgement, still wanted to be told I was enough. That contradiction tore at me as I replayed every moment of the past, every rejection, every insult, every time I reached for them and found only air. I thought of the birthday when I turned 21 alone in my tiny studio, lighting a candle stuck in a piece of bread because cake was a luxury I couldn't justify, whispering a wish I never spoke aloud, that they would remember me, that they would love me again. But they never did, and yet here they were, all these years later, not to mend what they had broken, not to ask forgiveness, but to demand my home, my security, my proof that I had endured without them. It was almost laughable if it hadn't hurt so much. As the hours slipped by, I traced the familiar grooves of my furniture with my eyes, each piece a marker of my journey. The second-hand couch I had bargained for at a thrift shop, the table I had sanded and stained myself, the photographs on the wall of places I had visited when I finally earned enough to travel. All symbols of independence, of resilience, of identity. They spoke to me in a language my parents never understood, the language of survival, of pride hard-earned. And still, the thought lingered like poison in my chest. Was I being selfish? Was I truly heartless for refusing to sacrifice for my sister? The questions spiraled until I realized they weren't mine at all. They were theirs. Echoes of years of conditioning meant to keep me small, compliant, useful. In that moment, clarity struck me. My parents didn't want me for who I was. They wanted me for what I could give, what I could sacrifice. To them, love was conditional, loyalty a transaction, and family a tool of control. And as that realization settled into me, I felt the bitterness rise, but also something else, a grim kind of freedom. The understanding that maybe I didn't need to keep carrying their expectations like chains around my neck. Maybe the weight of the past wasn't meant to define me, but to remind me of how far I had come. Yet even as I thought it, I knew the battle wasn't over, because the past isn't something you can simply put down. It lingers, it shapes, it whispers, and as I sat there in the silence of my living room, staring at the life I had built, I felt the heaviness of that history. The day I agreed to meet them felt heavy from the moment I woke, as though the air itself carried the weight of generations of expectation pressing against my chest. I had rehearsed my words in the mirror, practiced my tone, tried to steady the storm raging inside me, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of stepping back into the lion's den. We met at my parents' house, the same one I had grown up in, the walls unchanged, the curtains still stiff and pristine as though untouched by time. And yet everything felt smaller, colder, suffocating. My sister sat slumped on the sofa, her cheeks red and blotchy from tears, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, and I felt a pang of the old instinct to comfort her, to protect her. But it was quickly drowned out by the memory of years when no one had protected me. My parents sat across from me, their eyes sharp and unyielding, assessing me not as their child, but as a resource, a means to solve a problem. For a fleeting second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The very people who had cast me aside now looking at me as both savior and betrayer, depending on which choice I made. My father cleared his throat, his voice stern and deliberate. "We've thought about this long and hard. The only way out of this mess is for you to sell your house. It's the practical solution." My mother nodded in agreement, her face painted with a mixture of sadness and authority, as though her sorrow excused the cruelty of the demand. My sister looked at me with pleading eyes, whispering, "Please, I don't know what else to do." The silence that followed felt unbearable, a tension stretching so taut I thought it might snap and shred us all. I inhaled deeply, feeling my heart pound in my chest, and steadied myself with the truth I had buried for so long. "I love my sister," I said quietly, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every word. "But I will not destroy the only life I've managed to build after you abandoned me. This house isn't just bricks and wood, it's proof I survived without you." For a moment, no one moved. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched as though he could grind my defiance into dust. My mother's lips parted in shock, the faintest gasp escaping her as if I had just spoken blasphemy. My sister broke into fresh sobs, hiding her face in her hands, as though my refusal was the cruelest betrayal she had ever endured. But beneath the weight of their disappointment, their anger, and their disbelief, I felt something they couldn't touch. an ember of freedom, glowing brighter with every passing second. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the outcast begging for their approval. I was the one setting the terms. My father's voice cracked like thunder. "Do you understand what you're saying? You're condemning your sister." I met his fury with calm, my own voice even and steady now. "No, I'm refusing to condemn myself. For once." My mother leaned forward, her tone sharp, slicing through the room like glass. "We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us. You owe her." I felt the old guilt surge, the familiar chain tightening around my chest. But this time I refused to let it choke me. "You raised me until I no longer fit the image you wanted," I replied, my words firm, deliberate. "Then you cut me off and left me to fight alone. Don't stand there and tell me I owe you when the only thing I've ever had from you is abandonment." Their faces hardened, masks of cold fury and disbelief, but I pressed on, the dam within me finally breaking. This house is more than shelter. It's every sleepless night I endured, every shift I worked until my body collapsed, every dream I refused to bury, even when you left me for dead. It's mine, not because you gave it to me, but because I clawed it out of the dirt you shoved me into, and I will not give it up, not for you, not for anyone. My sister's sobs grew louder, her voice muffled through her hands. "I thought you cared about me." And God, it hurt to hear her say that, because I did care. I always had, but caring didn't mean self-destruction. "I do care," I said softly, turning to her. "But love doesn't mean erasing myself for you. It doesn't mean sacrificing the only proof I have that I survived when no one else believed I could. I can't fix this for you. And I won't pretend that giving up my home would even save you. It would only destroy me." The room fell into a heavy silence, every breath thick with judgment, disappointment, and unspoken rage. For once, though, I didn't flinch under their gaze. I felt the tremors of fear in my hands, the familiar ache of wanting to belong, to be loved. But I also felt something else. Strength. Strength I had earned through every hardship, every lonely night, every moment of pain that had forged me into someone who could finally stand tall in the face of those who once controlled me. When I stood to leave, their eyes followed me, my mother's sharp with cold fury, my father's filled with a dangerous quiet, my sister's broken and wet with tears. But I didn't waver. At the door, I turned once more and said the words that sealed everything, words that tasted like steel and fire on my tongue. This time, the answer is no. And with that, I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, the sound final, irrevocable, like the closing of a chapter I had been trapped in my whole life. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky open, and for the first time in years I felt lighter. The weight of guilt and obligation no longer pressed against me like an anchor. I was still grieving, still aching, still carrying scars, but I was also free, truly, finally free.